The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, thin, official, and dangerous in a way that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. At first, I thought it was junk mail. By the time I finished reading, I realized someone had just tried to turn my life upside down. Notice of violation, illegal fence installation. Illegal. I stared at the words, blinking slowly, like maybe they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My fence had been standing peacefully in my backyard for 3 months. It was clean, professionally installed, and most importantly exactly where the property line survey from years ago said it should be. Or so I thought. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the yard, lighting up the very fence now being called illegal. The wooden panels stood straight and innocent, casting long shadows across the grass. Nothing about it looked wrong. But someone clearly disagreed. And I had a very strong suspicion who that someone was. Karen. My neighbor 2 houses down had been watching the fence go up like it was a personal insult. I still remembered the way she stood on the sidewalk that day, arms crossed, lips tight, eyes narrowed like she was mentally filing paperwork against me. At the time, I ignored her. Big mistake. Because according to the letter in my shaking hands, the HOA had received a formal complaint claiming my fence crossed into community property. Worse, the notice demanded I remove it within 14 days or face escalating fines. 14 days. My chest tightened. I hadn't cut corners. I hadn't guessed measurements. I had hired professionals. Paid good money. Followed the rules, or at least, I was absolutely certain I had. But Karen clearly believed otherwise. Through my kitchen window, I could see her house in the distance. Right on cue, her front door opened. She stepped outside slowly, like someone enjoying a private victory. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. What Karen didn't realize was that I keep records. Very good records. And before this was over, her little complaint was about to backfire in a way the entire neighborhood would remember. The moment I finished reading the violation notice, I walked straight to my home office and pulled open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. If Karen thought I was the type of neighbor who guessed measurements, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Inside that drawer sat a neatly labeled folder marked Property Documents. I slid it out slowly, my earlier panic cooling into something sharper. Focus. Determination. The kind of calm that only shows up when you know the truth is on your side. Still, a small knot of doubt twisted in my stomach. What if something had changed? What if the old survey was outdated? HOAs love technicalities, and Karen looked exactly like someone who collected them for sport. I opened the folder and spread the papers across my desk. There it was, the official land survey, stamped, signed, and dated. Clean. Professional. Precise. My fence line sat comfortably inside my property boundary. Not touching. Not even close. A slow breath left my lungs. For a moment, relief washed over me. Then I remembered Karen's smile from earlier. And the relief faded. Because people like Karen didn't file official complaints unless they thought they had something solid. Which meant one of 2 things was happening. Either she was bluffing. Or she had found something I hadn't seen. I leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing at the neat black lines on the survey map. The measurements were clear. The boundaries were firm. Everything looked exactly right. So why did this feel like the beginning of a much bigger fight? Outside, a car door slammed. I glanced through the window just in time to see Karen walking along the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, that same satisfied expression still sitting on her face. She wasn't worried. Not even a little. And suddenly, neither was I. Because if Karen wanted a property line battle, I was more than ready to give her one. What she didn't know yet was this. I don't panic. I prepare. And the next move I was about to make would wipe that confident smile right off her face. Before I closed the folder, I reached for my phone and opened the number of the survey company that had handled everything. If this was going to become a fight, I wanted fresh proof ready and waiting. The quiet game had officially begun, and Karen had no idea what was coming next. By the next morning, I was already sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and my phone on speaker. If Karen wanted to play the illegal fence game, I was going to play it properly with professionals. The survey company picked up on the third ring. "Good morning, Precision Land Survey." "Hi," I said calmly. "You handled a residential boundary survey for my property last year. I need to schedule a verification survey as soon as possible." There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Everything okay with the property?" I glanced out the window toward my perfectly innocent fence. "That depends who you ask." Within 10 minutes, the appointment was set. The surveyor would arrive Friday morning. Perfect. Because according to the HOA letter, my 14-day countdown had already started ticking. Over the next 2 days, something interesting happened. Karen started appearing everywhere. When I checked the mail, there she was, watering plants that definitely didn't need watering. When I took the trash out, suddenly she was walking her little white dog past my house for the third time that afternoon. And every single time our eyes met, she wore the same tight, satisfied smile. She thought she had already won. I kept my face neutral. Quiet. Patient. Friday morning arrived cool and bright. Right on schedule, a white truck with the survey company's logo rolled slowly into my driveway. A tall man in a reflective vest stepped out, carrying equipment that looked expensive enough to make any HOA nervous. Karen's blinds twitched instantly. I almost smiled. The surveyor introduced himself as Mark and got straight to work. Within minutes, bright orange markers began appearing along the edges of my yard. He moved with calm precision, checking coordinates, adjusting his tripod, occasionally jotting notes onto a digital tablet. I stayed back and let him work. Across the street, Karen was no longer pretending to garden. She was watching closely. After nearly an hour, Mark walked back toward me, removing his sunglasses. His expression was professional, but there was a hint of something else there too. Something that made my pulse tick up just slightly. "Well," he said carefully, "I've got your answer." Behind him, the orange boundary flag stood clearly in the morning light. And for the first time since that letter arrived, Karen's confident smile was starting to fade. Mark didn't rush his words. He looked down once more at the tablet in his hand, then back at me, calm and matter of fact. "Your fence," he said, "is fully inside your property line." For a second, I just stared at him. Then the tight pressure that had been sitting in my chest for days finally cracked open. Not relief exactly, more like confirmation. The quiet kind of victory you don't celebrate out loud. "Not even close?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "You've got a comfortable margin. Whoever filed that complaint either made a mistake, or didn't check very carefully." Across the street, Karen froze mid-step. I didn't look directly at her, but I could feel the shift in the air. The way her posture stiffened. The way her arms slowly uncrossed, like the script she had written in her head was suddenly falling apart. "Good." Mark finished placing the final orange flag near the back corner of the yard. From above, the boundary line would look crystal clear, a bright dotted path running cleanly outside my fence. Exactly where it had always been. "Can you provide an official report?" I asked. "Already in progress," he said with a small professional smile. "You'll have a stamped digital copy by tonight. Hard copy mailed within 3 business days." Perfect. Because I had a feeling the HOA was about to receive some very interesting paperwork. As Mark packed up his equipment, Karen finally made her move. She stepped off her driveway and walked slowly toward the edge of the sidewalk near my house. Not close enough to start a conversation, but close enough to watch every single movement. Her confident smile was gone now. In its place was something tighter. Something uncertain. I gave her the same calm expression I'd been practicing all week. No gloating. No comments. Just quiet. Because silence, I was learning, made people like Karen far more nervous than arguments ever could. By late afternoon, the email from the survey company arrived exactly as promised. I opened the attached PDF and felt my lips press into a thin, satisfied line. Stamped. Signed. Precise to the inch. My fence wasn't illegal. It wasn't even questionable. It was perfectly, undeniably mine. And suddenly, Karen's complaint wasn't my problem anymore. It was hers. I closed the laptop slowly, already planning my next move. Because proving her wrong was only step one. What happened next was going to make the situation a lot more uncomfortable for Karen than she ever expected. I didn't respond to the HOA immediately. That was the first thing Karen got wrong about me. People like her expected panic. Quick reactions. Emotional emails sent too fast and regretted later. Instead, I let the stamped survey report sit quietly in my inbox for a full 12 hours. Long enough for confidence to settle in. Long enough to plan. The next morning, with fresh coffee beside my keyboard, I finally drafted my response. Short. Professional. Surgical. I attached the official survey report, highlighted the confirmed boundary lines, and politely requested that the violation notice be reviewed and withdrawn. No accusations. No attitude. Just facts, clean and undeniable. Then I hit send. For the rest of the day, the neighborhood felt different. Word travels fast in HOA communities, and by mid-afternoon I noticed more than one curious glance from passing neighbors. Karen's front blinds opened and closed more times than usual. Her car left the driveway twice and returned once. Restless energy. Good. Around 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. An email from the HOA. That was faster than I expected. I opened it calmly, but the shift in tone was immediate. Gone was the stiff legal language from the violation letter. In its place was something noticeably more careful. Thank you for providing the updated survey documentation. We are currently reviewing the materials and will follow up shortly. I leaned back slowly in my chair. They were already softening. Which meant one very important thing. Karen hadn't given them solid proof when she filed her complaint. She had assumed. And assumptions, especially documented ones, had a funny way of aging badly. Through the window, I spotted her again standing near her mailbox, pretending to sort through letters that clearly didn't require that much attention. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked toward my house. Waiting. Watching. Probably expecting to see contractors pulling down my illegal fence. Instead, I simply closed my laptop and went about my evening like nothing was wrong. Because now the pressure wasn't on me anymore. It was on the HOA. And on Karen. 2 days later, another email arrived. This one was much shorter. Much more direct. And the moment I read the first line, I knew the entire situation had just flipped completely in my favor. Karen hadn't just been wrong. She had been very, very publicly wrong. The email was only 3 sentences long. But it might as well have been a full public apology. I opened it slowly, already sensing what was coming. The subject line alone told me everything: violation notice update. Below it, the HOA board had suddenly discovered a much more polite tone. After reviewing the certified survey you provided, the violation notice regarding your fence has been formally withdrawn. Your property is in full compliance with community guidelines. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I wanted to enjoy it properly. Formally withdrawn. Full compliance. Every careful word felt like quiet confirmation of what I had known from the beginning. Karen had fired her shot and completely missed. But the email wasn't finished. The final sentence was where things got interesting. We appreciate your prompt cooperation in resolving this matter. I almost laughed. Prompt cooperation. That was one way to describe it. Outside, the afternoon was warm and still, but the energy in the neighborhood had shifted again. I could feel it before I even looked out the window. Karen was in her driveway. Arms crossed. Watching my house like she was trying to will something bad into existence. I stepped outside calmly, phone still in my hand, and walked toward the fence she had been so determined to remove. The wooden panels stood exactly where they always had, straight, solid, completely legal. For the first time since this started, I let myself take a slow, satisfied breath. Karen noticed. Of course she did. Her posture stiffened the moment our eyes met. The confident smile she'd worn all week was completely gone now, replaced by something tighter, more uncomfortable. Good. But I still didn't say a word. Because here's the thing about people who try to outsmart you the moment they realize they've lost is far more powerful when you stay quiet. I turned casually and walked back toward my front door. Behind me, I heard Karen shift her weight on the driveway gravel. Restless. Frustrated. And probably very aware that the HOA now had official documentation proving her complaint was baseless. What she didn't know yet was that this situation still wasn't completely over. Because later that evening, another email arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA. And the moment I saw the sender's name, I realized Karen was about to make this situation even worse for herself. The email wasn't long. In fact, it was barely 5 lines. But the moment I saw the sender, Karen herself, I knew she hadn't learned a single thing from the last week. I opened it slowly. I still believe your fence is improperly placed. I will be requesting an independent review. This matter is not over. I read it once. Then again. And this time, I did laugh. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, disbelieving breath through my nose. Because this wasn't confidence. This was desperation. Karen had already lost the official HOA review. She had watched a licensed surveyor mark the boundary lines in bright orange flags. She had seen the violation notice get formally withdrawn. And still, she was pushing. That told me something important. She wasn't trying to be right anymore. She was trying not to be embarrassed. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and thought for a moment. There were 2 ways I could handle this. I could ignore her completely. Or I could make sure this ended in a way that prevented future misunderstandings. Outside, her car door slammed. I glanced through the window just in time to see her pacing near the sidewalk, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her movements were sharp now, irritated. Controlled frustration trying very hard not to show itself. Too late. The neighborhood had definitely noticed the orange survey flag still standing proudly along my yard. And people were starting to ask questions. By the next morning, the situation escalated exactly the way I suspected it would. A white SUV with an unfamiliar company logo rolled slowly down our street and stopped near my property line. Karen stepped out behind it, chin lifted just a little too high. Independent review. She actually went through with it. I watched calmly from my front window as another surveyor unloaded his equipment. Karen stood nearby with her arms folded, clearly expecting this second opinion to magically reverse reality. I almost felt second-hand embarrassment. Almost. Because here's what Karen still didn't understand. Property lines don't change just because someone is stubborn. The second surveyor began setting up his tripod near the same corner Mark had measured days earlier. Karen's eyes were locked on him. Waiting. Hoping. But as the minutes ticked by, the man's expression started to shift. And very slowly. So did hers. I stayed inside at first. Not because I was nervous, those days were long gone, but because I didn't need to hover. The bright orange survey flags were still exactly where Mark had placed them, quietly doing their job. Outside, Karen stood stiffly beside the second surveyor, her arms folded so tightly it looked uncomfortable. She was watching him the way someone watches a slot machine they're sure is about to pay out. The surveyor, a stocky man with a sun-faded cap, worked methodically. Tripod down. Laser aligned. Tablet check. He moved along the same boundary path Mark had walked days earlier, stopping at each corner point, occasionally frowning slightly as he verified coordinates. Karen's confidence started slipping about 10 minutes in. I could see it even through the window. At first, she stood tall. Then her weight shifted. Then her arms slowly uncrossed. By the 20-minute mark, she wasn't standing beside him anymore, she was hovering a few steps back, like maybe distance would somehow change the numbers. It didn't. Finally, the surveyor straightened up and removed his cap, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked down once more at his tablet, then turned toward Karen. Even from my front window, I could see the moment her stomach dropped. His expression wasn't dramatic. It was professional. Certain. I stepped outside just as he spoke. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the existing fence appears to be well within the homeowner's property boundary." Silence hit the driveway like a brick. Karen blinked. Once. Twice. That can't be right," she said quickly, her voice tighter than I had ever heard it. The surveyor calmly turned the tablet toward her, showing the mapped lines. "It's correct. There's actually a comfortable margin." Comfortable margin. I had to work very hard to keep my face neutral. Karen's shoulders dropped just slightly, the first real crack in her armor. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue again, but this time, nothing came out. Because now she didn't just have one professional report proving her wrong. She had two. Documented. Measured. Final. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the screen like maybe the numbers would magically rearrange themselves if she looked hard enough. They didn't. Eventually, the surveyor packed up his equipment and drove away, leaving the quiet street and Karen's very public miscalculation behind. I turned calmly toward my front door. Still silent. Still composed. And behind me, I could practically feel the weight of Karen realizing the situation had officially slipped completely out of her control. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just aware. HOA communities run on quiet observation, and word had clearly spread. The orange survey flags were still visible along my yard, and now everyone knew what they meant. 2 licensed surveyors. 2 identical conclusions. 1 very unnecessary complaint. Karen didn't come outside that morning. Or the next. Her driveway stayed empty longer than usual, and the front blinds that used to twitch every time I stepped into my yard remained firmly shut. The restless confidence she had carried at the start of this mess was gone, replaced by the kind of silence that usually follows a very public mistake. I never knocked on her door. Never sent another message. Never said, "I told you so." Because I didn't need to. The HOA made the final move for me. 3 days after the second survey, a formal community email went out to all residents, the kind of general update they send to look organized and transparent. Most of it was routine neighborhood business. But right in the middle was one very careful line. Recent property boundary concerns within the community have been reviewed and resolved based on certified survey documentation. No names. No drama. Just enough information for everyone paying attention to understand exactly what had happened. And in HOA neighborhoods, people always pay attention. That afternoon, I was watering the lawn when Karen's front door finally opened. She stepped outside slowly, avoiding eye contact as she walked to her mailbox. The confident posture from before was gone. Smaller now. Quieter. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the street. I gave her a simple, polite nod. Nothing smug. Nothing sharp. Just calm. Because the truth had already done all the talking. She looked away first. And just like that, the whole situation was over.
My fine stayed exactly where it belongs, right, solid, and completely legal. The fines never came. The warning stopped it, and the quiet routine of the neighborhood returned to normal. But one thing had definitely changed. Karen never watched my yard the same eye again, and me, I went right back to minding my business with my very well documented record setting safely in the driver.